My question is, will you put out a collection of your short stories?
Yeah, the collection of short stories, the first one is called Side Jobs. It comes out in October. That's going to be the one. That's going to be the one featuring there's a new. It's a bunch of the stories that have already been published elsewhere, but they're kind of put together. And then there's a new novella called Aftermath. That's from. Don't think that. Okay. That's from Murphy's point of view, and it's set about 45 minutes after the end of Changes. Yeah, I had fun with that. Although it was really difficult getting into Murphy's headspace, but it was really rewarding by the time I was done. But yeah, that's the first one. I intended to have all the short stories in that one. There were two that couldn't go in there because of exclusivity clauses in contracts. That they weren't going to be free for another 6 months or a year. And the publisher's like, no, 6 months or a year is a big deal, whatever. So the only thing I can do is write some more short stories until I have to do a second collection, which I'll probably call like More Jobs or something, and have all the rest of them and put those all together there at some point. So that's the plan.
Hardcover or paperback?
I think it comes out hardcover first. Which, if you want to give your local library a call and say, hey, you should order this so I can check it out. Cool.
At the end of Changes, or rather a little bit before the end, the massive battle scene at Chichen Itza, when Ebenezer does his laying of the cattle move, is that a power of the Blackstaff?
The Blackstaff is what keeps that kind of thing from driving him insane, turning him into a giggling villain. Yeah, you go messing with black magic in the Dresden Files, it's very, very bad for you. At the same time, magic is something that happens because you truly believe when you set out to do it that you should be able to do that sort of thing. And so that kind of says something, that says a few things about Ebenezer that really Harry hasn't run into in any other form, from right there. But yeah, poor guy. He's got a tough job.
My favorite character is probably Bob the Skull. And
Bob, an inside joke between you and a writing teacher. I'll tell you about that.
Well, I just wanted to know more about the character and your inspiration for it.
Okay, here we go, yeah. When I got done with, I think, chapter 2 or 3 of the book, of Stormfront, and she said, okay, well, this is all right. What are you going to do after this? I said, well, Dresden's going to have to go. I'm going to give him this kind of research assistant who's going to be, somebody who's very, very knowledgeable about the serious ins and outs, the engineering of magic, if you will. Sort of a cross between a personal assistant, a lab tech, and a PC. That will store information for him and help him out in the lab. And she's like, and it's going to be this character. And she says, okay, that's great. That will be fine. Just make sure you don't make him, you don't create a talking head. Talking head, okay, that's writer jargon for the character who shows up and just dispenses information and vanishes. You see him like in like a lot of 50s bad sci-fi, where the perennial thing that they do is Mr. Scientist shows up and says, well, as you know, Bob, the escape velocity necessary. And it's like, but if Bob knows that, why are you talking to him about it? That doesn't seem right. So that's the character you want to avoid, the talking head character. So I made him a literal talking head named Bob. And my teacher looked at me and said, you think you're funny, don't you?
Okay. Does the Blackstaff have any powers that relate to the dead?
Other than making people dead? Really, that's kind of the point. The staff itself, what it really does is it keeps Ebenezer sane while he's doing insane things. So lucky him, he gets to be treated to a hideously guilty conscience and nightmares and so on later. But that's better than later being like, which is sort of the other option if you're going to go around using magic like that.
Good morning, Jim. How you doing today?
Good morning.
My question is, are any of the characters in the Dresden books based on anyone that you know, or are they based on yourself?
Are any characters in the Dresden books based on someone I know, or on myself? There's a few. Bob the Skull is kind of my inner 14-year-old, who at the time would never, ever, ever have said or thought the things that Bob the Skull says and thinks. So it's kind of fun. Let me think. Shiro was based on an actual martial arts teacher I had. Well, him and his right hand guy at their dojo. His name was Seiyu Oyata, and he's a really, really interesting guy. He was the guy who actually was a descendant of the last king of Okinawa, and was trained by Chinese monks because the Yakuza had moved into the power vacuum at the end of World War II, and it threatened his family. And the monks trained him to fight so that he could defend himself against a Yakuza assassin, and he killed half a dozen of them. And the Yakuza said, "It's getting expensive to do business here. We want you to work for us." He says, "No, I just want you to stay off my street." And the Yakuza said, "All right, that's more profitable." That was based on a couple of actual guys. Who is more like Mr. Miyagi than he has any right to be. The other character who's based off somebody who was actually real was Anna, who died in White Knight. Anna was a woman who, I was at the Whedon convention, and they were doing a charity auction, and I auctioned off a horrible death in the Dresden Files to whoever won the auction, and she wound up donating $3,000 to the Children's Cancer Research, and I did a little work. So those are the ones who are based off of real people. Everybody else is just sort of, I don't really base anybody specifically off someone. I go, you need to be in this novel. I draw influence from the people who are around me. My wife Shannon is probably most of my female characters. The first reaction to that is everybody goes, "Oh," and then I go, "Yeah, you know how many female villains are in my books?" But other than that, no, not really.
In rather a complete change of pace, Codex Alera. So there's a lot of clearly there's some Germanic influence, what with Calderon being a bunch of German names, and of course they're Romans. So just because I've been wondering about it, what kind of language do you think they speak? How close is it, do you think, to English, which is, after all, derived from both Latin and Germanic roots?
Well, the problem there is that for them, Latin never turned into a dead language. They were just kind of using it all along. And they had a couple of thousand years. I don't think they wound up speaking very much like us, or very much like the Roman. I don't think the Romans would have understood them either. The reason they got developed that way was because when I went and researched the Lost Legion, I found out that half of them were Roman legionnaires, and about the other half of the legion was German mercenaries. So I said, okay, so we've got Germans and Romans, so when they actually built the society, I said, let's have this kind of bifurcated society with these big cosmopolitan city centers like the Romans loved, but then it broke out into the countryside, into the German freeholds that were prevalent throughout the Middle Ages. So, but yeah, they kept using the language and never really changed it. And they had to make up new words. That's always good for your language when you've got to make up new words.